So you fancy a 1960s Jaguar? Well, it's not an easy prospect, is it? Who can afford an E-Type? Not many of us. The Mark 10 is absolutely massive, and the Mark 2, again, that's not a cheap prospect, is it? So might I present to you the thinking man's Mark 2, the S-Type. Well, what's an S-Type? Well, the Jaguar people will know all about it, of course, but if you're not that clued up on Jaguars of this era, it's essentially the Mark 2 with the independent rear suspension from the Mark 10 and the E-Type. The story is that Jaguar, by the 60s, knew that the Mark 2 was aging, really. They needed something to keep it competitive, and so they did that by modernising the rear end and giving it better handling and class-leading sort of road holding. But of course this made it a much more expensive car because they had to modify the bodywork to accommodate the IRS rear end. The early monocoque body shell engineering meant that they had to do some quite complex work to it. And so it was quite an expensive prospect, so they introduced it as a new model which sat above the Mark II, and the Mark II carried on as a more affordable prospect. But these days, the S-Type is less sought after than the Mark II. It doesn't have the sort of Morse appeal, does it? So it's actually for years been a little bit of a best kept secret in Jaguar circles. The other thing is the S-Type, technically it's a much better car than the Mark II, and it does drive a lot better. And you can hate me in the comments for that, but I think that's right. That's what the magazine road testers said in the day, and that's what I think is true today still. So what do you need to know when you're buying an S-Type? Well, you might think it's much the same as buying a Mark II, and in some ways that is true, but the body shell is quite different in many important ways. The front wings, for instance, are different, and if you need a complete wing, you can get them. They are £4,500 plus VAT each. So don't buy one with absolutely wrecked wings. Of course, nobody really much buys a whole wing, do they? They have sections repaired, but again, it can get really expensive. So it's best to buy a car that has a sound body shell, because the bodywork repairs are what will really kill you financially on the S-Type. The running gear is pretty much standard 60s Jaguar, the XK engine and everything else, but the bodywork can get really expensive. So you need to really check every inch of it, and certainly the bottom 6 inches of it are really where the expense is going to come. So consider the front cross member, the sills obviously crucial, the floor pans as well, and obviously the panel edges, the door bottoms and everything like that. It's really a question of looking absolutely everywhere, unfortunately. And the suspension pickup points at the rear obviously are crucial for safety too. A quick and easy check you can do is to check the alignment of the doors, especially at the pillars. If the door alignment isn't quite right, it can often point to more serious problems elsewhere in the shell, and to do really complex repairs it does need the body jigging, and you know, professional work is not any good to just do patch repairs at home with a MIG welder. So yeah, check the body shell really carefully, because that will be the Achilles heel of a cheap one, certainly. When you're looking underneath, you've got box sections to check, and also the chassis legs. There's no chassis, but you know what I mean. And the suspension points are obviously important, particularly at the rear. And the spare wheel well can also be pretty crusty, but you know, that's probably the least of your problems, frankly. And otherwise, just make the usual checks, you know, for rust and for filler as well. A lot of these cars over the years have been patched up here and there, and often one that looks really nice can actually be hiding quite a lot of rot. But if you're used to looking at old cars, you should be able to get a good feel for how solid a shell is. You know, the odd bit of sort of flaking paint that turns out to be filler sort of somewhere up here, probably, you know, walk away from that one. But this one, we're at Pioneer Automobiles today near Cheveley, and this is a really nice example of an S-Type, because it's got a bit of a patina to it. The interior could probably do with freshening up, and you know, it's been in storage for a long time, but essentially the bodywork's really sound, and you know, this could be recommissioned really quite easily. This is the sort of S-Type you want to buy. Solid body, but the other stuff you can just deal with at home. So, assuming the bodywork's all present and correct, what about the running gear? Well, it's standard 60s Jaguar fare, really. All the S-Types have got the XK engine, 3.4 or 3.8. You will find them with 4.2, and you know, but it won't be standard. People blithely say, oh yeah, the XK engine is bulletproof. Well, it's pretty strong, but it's not bulletproof. You've got to look after it. For a start, you've got the alloy heads, so you do want to find a car that's had proper antifreeze in it, because if it's not, it'll probably just be full of rusty sludge, and you know, it'll never be entirely happy. If you start it from cold and you hear a bit of timing chain rattle, don't worry too much if it disappears again. But if it's got a noisy timing chain, that's a professional job, really, unless you're really keen and you fancy doing it at home. Oil leaks, not uncommon from the cam cover and from the rear seal as well. Otherwise, you know, problems should be pretty obvious, because by today's standards, the XK is an old design. If it runs well and it doesn't smoke too badly, then it's probably fine. Heavy smoking can either be a terminally worn engine, or sometimes, if you're lucky, it can just be the breather system. This one looks sort of crusty, but actually runs really nicely. So, don't be put off by appearances. And often, an engine that's got a sort of carefully polished cam cover and all sorts of shiny bits is not the one you want to buy. It's the one that just has a sort of honest coating of grime and, just fires and runs sweetly. Transmission options, you've either got the Borg-Warner automatic or you've got the Synchro Jaguar box. The automatic suits the car quite well, actually, but the manual does give it, a much more of a sporty feel, and it does feel a little bit more immediate, like the Mark II, for instance. This is a manual, and it is a nice change. Yeah, it's nice to drive. Be aware though, with the manuals, clutch change is an engine out job. So if the clutch feels like it's really badly juddering or it's slipping, then you want to be asking the seller for a few quid off, don't you, for that? So what about the underpinnings? Well, at the front end, you've got standard fare, wishbones, coil springs, quite a few bushes in there, and when they perish and fail, they will make the car feel a little bit imprecise. You can buy everything you need to refurbish it. The rear end is obviously a little bit more complicated because you've got the complete IRS setup, which sits in its own cage. What a lot of people do when it needs a major amount of work is to just simply drop the entire unit out of the car. It's common to do that for the E-Type and the XJS. You've got the A-arms with the bushes. They tend to perish, and when they do, you get all sorts of rear steer effects, and it just won't feel quite right. The other thing you've got to consider is that you often get oil leaking onto the rear brakes. They're inboard discs, of course, on the IRS cars, and that can cause all sorts of problems. And obviously, you've then got to drop the unit to fix that. Another area where the S-Type can bite you hard financially, after the bodywork that is the interior. There's a lot of it, of course, and in the finest 60s Jag tradition, it is all wood and leather. So this one's got what you'd call a patina. I mean, I actually like it, but of course the seats are heavily cracked. They could probably be restored actually with some colourant and clean. It's the lacquer on the veneer here that's just had it, basically. That can get expensive to fix, and there's a lot of it. They redesigned the interior of the S-Type to make it more like the Mark II, and so it is a little bit more lavish. They did things like they reshaped the seat bases to cover the centre console to make the car feel bigger, little tricks like that. The result is that, a tatty interior can be really quite expensive to bring up to sort of really top-notch standards. So don't overlook the cost of restoring a tatty interior. But on the other hand, if you like your 60s cars to have a sort of patina to them, you could probably take this off, sand it, get a spray lacquer and do a respectable job and just enjoy the car. I mean, that's the key to these 60s Jaguars. Don't aim for absolute concours perfection. Get it looking nice and enjoyable and just enjoy it, because they're great cars to drive. And there's a real sort of fun to be had in just smoking around in one that's respectable, Of course, the good news is that by 60s Jaguar standards, the model range is mercifully simple to understand. You've got the 3.4 or the 3.8, you've either got the manual or the automatic. Both have their advantages. The automatic does drive really nicely, the manual feels a little bit more lively, but I would say buy on condition, really, rather than getting too hung up about the gearbox, unless you have a particular preference for one engine over another, or manual or automatic. But yeah, once you've made your choice and you've found a car, the S-Type really is the thinking man's way into the Mark II ownership experience, and it is still affordable. So, get busy, get hold of one before you miss your chance, because 60s Jag, this one, and it is drivable, usable, £8,750. You won't get a Mark II that's roadworthy for that money, will you? So thanks to Pioneer Automobiles near Cheveley for letting us take it out and have fun with it. But that's a nice affordable bit of 60s Jaguar. Meanwhile, if you're really into your classic Jaguars, then look for Jaguar World in the newsagents. And if you want some more classic car buying advice, just check out the rest of the channel and like and subscribe. There's plenty more content there for you.